Thomas Shelby stepped out of the bone-chilling December air of Silver Creek, brushing a thick layer of snow off the shoulders of his worn Carhartt jacket before entering the hushed warmth of the community bank. The heavy glass door clicked shut behind him, cutting off the howling wind that whipped down Main Street, leaving only the familiar scent of floor wax and old money. To Tom, this wasn't just a bank. For the past 4 years, it had been the keeper of his most important secret. He stamped his Red Wing boots on the mat, leaving behind streaks of melting slush and mud, then headed straight for teller window number 3, where his old friend Ed was already waiting with a knowing grin. "Tom, you are the most reliable alarm clock in this town," Ed remarked, pushing his reading glasses up his nose as he watched Tom place his checkbook on the marble counter. "If you didn't show up on the morning of the 20th, I'd probably have the sheriff send out a search party." Tom laughed, a deep, gravelly sound that echoed through the quiet lobby, crinkling the deep lines around his eyes, souvenirs from decades of squinting against the sun and welding sparks. "Don't worry. As long as this old pump in my chest is still running, I'll be here." He pulled a ballpoint pen from his breast pocket, the fabric frayed from thousands of similar repetitions, and began to fill out the pale blue transfer slip. His fingers, thick, calloused, and permanently stained with oil that had settled deep into the ridges of his prints, moved carefully across the delicate paper. They were the hands of a man who had spent a lifetime tightening bolts and bending metal, a stark contrast to the elegance of the numbers he was writing down. $3,200. He slid the slip under the glass partition. "For mortgage loan number 7423. Brian Shelby." Ed took the paper, his eyes holding a flicker of hesitation he tried to hide every month. "Still that house, huh, Tom? The real estate market is going crazy. I heard property values on North Hill doubled last year. Brian must be sitting on a gold mine thanks to you." "He's my son, Ed," Tom said softly, his voice dropping to a low rumble that brokered no argument. "When Mary passed, I promised her the boy would never have to scrape by like we did. I wanted him to have a foundation. A good house, a decent life, things it took me a lifetime to build." The printer whirred, spitting out a transaction receipt. A small, lifeless scrap of paper, yet it represented his son's freedom for another month. Tom folded it carefully, tucking it into his thick leather wallet right next to the black and white photo of his late wife. He never told Brian about these trips to the bank. Brian knew his father helped with the payments, but he never saw the ritual. To Brian, it was just a notification on a banking app. To Tom, it was sweat, early mornings at the shop, and a silent sacrifice measured in digits. Leaving the bank, Tom drove his 1995 Ford F-150 over to Miller's Hardware at the end of the block. The truck, rusted red with a bed full of scratches and an exhaust that popped like a firecracker, was his pride and joy. People could drive their silent electric cars all they wanted, but to Tom, a vehicle needed to have a voice. He walked into the store, inhaling the perfume of sawdust and motor oil. "Morning, Mr. Shelby. What we fixing today?" the young clerk asked. "I need a wrench set." "The best one you've got," Tom replied, scanning the shelves. He stopped in front of a shiny Craftsman set, nestled in a black velvet-lined case. Brian used to love tinkering with these when he was a kid, stealing Tom's tools to tighten bolts on his tricycle. Tom smiled, imagining his son, now a real estate agent in a suit, rolling up his sleeves to help him fix that loose fireplace mantel this Christmas. It would be a gift to remind the boy of his roots, of the power of working hands. He paid for the gift, asking for it to be wrapped in red and green paper. Just as he stepped out onto the sidewalk, the phone in his pocket buzzed. Tom pulled out his old smartphone, the screen cracked in the corner, and squinted at the text message. It was Brian. "Dad, can you stop by the house this afternoon? Emily and I need to talk about the Christmas plan." Tom's heart skipped a beat with pure joy. He had been waiting for this invitation all week. Surely, the kids wanted him to come over early to help hang the lights on that steep Victorian roof. Brian was always terrified of heights. Or maybe Emily wanted him to taste test the turkey brine. He typed back quickly with his large thumbs. "On my way. Bringing backup." He meant the wrenches, but Brian would probably think it was a joke. Tom climbed into his truck and turned the key. The V8 engine roared to life, shaking the entire rusted frame and belching a cloud of white smoke into the frigid air. He patted the worn leather steering wheel affectionately. "All right, old girl. Time to go see the kid. We're parking in a fancy driveway today." He steered toward North Hill, where the grand Victorian homes looked down imperiously on the town below. His mind was filled with visions of a warm evening, laughter by the fire, and eggnog. He pressed the gas, and the truck surged forward into the thickening snowstorm, completely unaware that its loud engine and weathered appearance were about to become the blade that severed the very bond he had spent years securing. Thomas is driving through the snow, believing he is about to be welcomed with open arms, unaware that a cold betrayal awaits him. If you respect the silent sacrifices parents make for their children, please comment the number 8 below to let us know you stand with Tom. And if you haven't already, I highly recommend you subscribe to Dramaine Revenge and turn on the notification bell right now. You do not want to miss the moment this father's kindness turns into a lesson they will never forget. Your support helps us continue creating great content to inform and inspire you. Now, let's continue to see what happens when that old truck pulls into the driveway. Tom's 1995 Ford F-150 looked like a wild, rusted beast that had stumbled into a showroom for luxury sedans. He maneuvered the truck carefully up the heated, paved driveway, pulling it to a stop right behind a gleaming silver Lexus and a black Mercedes with out-of-state plates. The contrast was almost comical, the immaculate, polished curves of the guests' cars versus the square, dented body of his truck, still caked in the road salt and grime of the drive over. He killed the engine, but the old beast shuddered once more before falling silent, letting out a final loud bang from the tailpipe that echoed embarrassingly against the pristine siding of the house. Tom winced, patting the dashboard. "Easy, girl. Don't scare the neighbors." Stepping out, he looked up at the towering Victorian home. The slate roof he had paid to replace last summer, all $30,000 of it, glistened under the fresh snow. He wondered briefly if Brian or Emily even knew how heavy slate was, or the skill it took to lay it so it wouldn't leak for 100 years. Probably not. They just knew it looked historically accurate. He grabbed the gift-wrapped box of wrenches from the passenger seat, tucked it under his arm, and rang the doorbell. The wreath on the door was made of real balsam fir and smelled expensive. The door swung open, revealing Emily. She was wearing a silk dress that shimmered like liquid gold, her hair piled high in an intricate bun. Her smile, which had been bright a second ago, faltered the moment her eyes dropped to Tom's boots. "Oh." "Hi, Tom," she said, her voice pitching up a little too high. "You're early. Just wanted to beat the worst of the storm," Tom said, stopping his boots on the porch to dislodge the snow, unaware that a clump of mud flew off and landed on the pristine doormat. "Plus, I figured Brian might need a hand with the tree topper. You know how he gets about ladders." He stepped inside, bringing a gust of cold air and the faint scent of gasoline with him. The living room was breathtaking. A 12-foot fir tree dominated the space, decorated exclusively in beige and gold ornaments. It was beautiful, but it felt cold, lacking the chaotic color of the family ornaments Brian had grown up with. Sitting on the cream-colored sofa were an older couple holding crystal flutes of champagne. Richard Vance, wearing a cashmere sweater draped over his shoulders, looked over the rim of his glasses. Linda Vance, dripping in tasteful pearls, simply stared. "Brian," Richard called out, his voice booming with practiced authority. "I didn't know you scheduled the maintenance staff for today. Is the boiler acting up again?" The room went deadly silent. Emily let out a nervous titter that sounded like glass breaking. Tom stood frozen in the entryway, the box of wrenches heavy under his arm. He looked down at his flannel shirt and his worn jeans, suddenly acutely aware of how out of place he felt in the house he was paying for. Brian hurried in from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a towel. He was wearing a suit that cost more than Tom's first car. When he saw his father, his face didn't light up. It drained of color. "Dad," Brian said, breathless. "You're here." "Maintenance staff?" Tom repeated slowly, looking at Richard. "That's a good one, Richard." "But no, just the father of the host." Richard didn't apologize. He just took a sip of his champagne and turned back to his wife, murmuring something about rustic charm. "Dad, can I talk to you in the kitchen for a second?" Brian asked, grabbing Tom's elbow with a grip that was a little too tight. He steered him away from the living room, past the dining table set with china Tom was terrified to look at, and into the kitchen. The kitchen was a masterpiece of modern design, granite countertops, stainless steel appliances, and a professional-grade range. Tom knew exactly how much it cost because the invoice for the remodel was still in his filing cabinet at home. "Look, Dad," Brian started, leaning against the island. He couldn't meet Tom's eyes. He was focused intently on a smudge on the granite. "I'm really glad you came, but we have a situation." "What is it?" The The turkey dry. Tom joked weakly, trying to lighten the crushing atmosphere. Brian winced. No, it's the Vances. They're very particular people, Dad. Traditional. Old money Connecticut types. And Brian finally looked up, his eyes pleading and terrified. And they're finding it a little hard to relax. Look, Dad, I love you, but the truck parked out front? It's blocking the view for the guests arriving later. And your clothes. Richard made a comment earlier about standards. Tom felt a coldness spread through his chest that had nothing to do with the snow outside. My truck is blocking the view? It's not just the truck. Brian rushed on, his voice dropping to a whisper. It's the whole vibe. Emily is stressed out of her mind trying to impress them. They're judging everything. And having you here, looking like you just came from the shop, it's making it harder for us. He took a deep breath, delivering the blow. We were thinking, maybe it would be better if you came by next week. After they leave, we could do a late Christmas. Just us. Burgers and beers, like you like. Tom stared at his son. He looked at the soft hands that had never known a callus, the anxious sweat on his forehead. He realized then that Brian wasn't doing this to be cruel. He was doing it because he was weak. He was a man willing to erase his own history to fit into someone else's future. Next week, Tom repeated, his voice devoid of emotion. When the party is over. It's just easier this way, Dad. Please understand. Tom looked down at the gift in his hands. The heavy steel wrenches, tools meant to build and repair. He realized there was nothing here left to fix. He set the box gently on the cold granite counter. I understand my position perfectly, Brian, Tom said. The silence in the kitchen was heavier than the slate roof above them. Don't worry. I won't stain your pretty picture any longer. Dad, wait, you can take some food. I'm not hungry, Tom said. He turned on his heel, his boots squeaking slightly on the hardwood floor. He walked back through the living room, ignoring the Vances, ignoring Emily's relieved smile, and walked out the front door. He didn't look back as he climbed into his truck. He fired up the engine, and this time when it backfired, he didn't wince. He let it roar. The blizzard outside the windshield screamed, a white wall of fury that matched the tempest raging inside Tom's chest as he steered the Ford F-150 away from the manicured lawns of North Hill. Behind him, the warm glow of the Victorian house faded into the swirling darkness, taking with it the vision of the Christmas he had paid for but wasn't allowed to enjoy. Next week, Tom muttered to himself, his grip on the steering wheel tightening until his knuckles turned white. When the party is over. He laughed, a dry, bitter sound. There wouldn't be a party next week. There wouldn't be any more parties at all. Not if he had anything to say about it. He didn't drive home. The thought of his empty house, with its silence and shadows, was unbearable. Instead, the truck seemed to find its own way down the winding roads to the edge of town, pulling into the gravel lot of Sarah's diner. The neon sign buzzed in the storm, a beacon of pink and blue fighting against the gray. Tom pushed open the door, a little bell jingling cheerfully above his head. The diner was empty, save for an old trucker nursing a coffee in the far corner. The air smelled of frying bacon, old vinyl, and fresh coffee, the perfume of comfort. I was wondering if you'd beat the storm, Tom, a warm voice called out. Sarah stood behind a counter, wiping down the laminated surface. At 55, she had a kind face framed by graying hair tied back in a practical ponytail. She wore a stained apron over a flannel shirt that matched the unpretentious vibe of the room. She didn't ask why he wasn't at his son's house. She didn't ask why he looked like a man who had just been punched in the gut. She just reached under the glass display case. Black coffee and a slice of the cherry pie. It's still warm, she said, sliding the thick ceramic mug and plate across the counter before he even sat down. Tom slid onto the stool, the vinyl sighing under his weight. He took a forkful of the pie. The tart cherries and the buttery, flaky crust tasted like home. It tasted like dignity. Thanks, Sarah, he rasped. You're a lifesaver. Rough night, she asked softly, refilling his mug. You could say that. Tom stared into the black liquid. Apparently, my truck is too ugly for the neighborhood. And my clothes. Well, let's just say I don't fit the aesthetic. Sarah stopped wiping the counter. Her eyes hardened. That boy of yours has a lot of nerve. Does he forget who taught him to walk? Who paid for that fancy degree? He didn't say it like that. Tom defended automatically, then stopped. Actually, he didn't say much at all. That was the problem. He let his in-laws do the talking. I'm just the maintenance staff to them. Suddenly, a loud squeak bang echoed through the diner as the wind caught the front door, slamming it against the frame. The top hinge groaned in protest, loose and rattling. Damn thing, Sarah sighed, looking at the door. I've been meaning to call a handyman, but they charge an arm and a leg just to drive out here in this weather. Tom didn't say a word. He stood up, walked out to his truck, and returned a minute later with his toolbox. He ignored his coffee and the pie. He went straight to the door. He pulled out a screwdriver and a small can of WD-40. With practiced ease, he tightened the screws, realigned the pin, and gave it a quick spray. He opened and closed the door. Silent, solid. He wiped his hands on a rag and sat back down. Sarah looked at the door, then at Tom. She reached across the counter and covered his grease-stained hand with her own. You know, Tom, she said, her voice fierce and quiet, those hands of yours? They built half this town. They fixed my furnace when I couldn't afford a heater. They're worth more than all the gold in North Hill. Anyone who can't see that is blind, and anyone who's ashamed of them doesn't deserve their help. Tom froze. Doesn't deserve their help. The words hit him harder than the insults at the party. He looked at his hand resting under hers. Rough, scarred, capable. And for 4 years, he had been using this hand to sign checks for people who wouldn't even let him sit at their table. He wasn't helping Brian. He was crippling him. He was buying affection that wasn't for sale. He pulled his hand back gently and reached into his pocket for his phone. Do you mind if I make a call? He asked. Go ahead, Sarah said, watching him closely. Tom dialed a number he knew by heart, the priority banking line for premium customers. He didn't waver. Community Bank, Jennifer speaking. How can I help you, Mr. Shelby? Hi, Jennifer, Tom said, his voice steady and calm, the voice of a man who finally knew his worth. I need to make a change to my account. Immediately, of course. What do you need? Cancel the automatic monthly transfer to mortgage loan 7423. The one for Brian Shelby. There was a brief pause on the line, followed by the clicking of a keyboard. You want to cancel the transfer for this month, sir? No, Tom said, looking at the silent door he had just fixed. I want to cancel it permanently. Effective today. Block any future requests from that account number. Done, Jennifer said. Is there anything else? No. That's everything. Merry Christmas, Jennifer. He ended the call and set the phone on the counter. A massive weight seemed to evaporate from his shoulders, leaving him lighter than he had felt in years. He wasn't angry anymore. He was free. He picked up his fork and finished the last bite of the cherry pie. Then he looked up at Sarah, who was smiling at him with a look he hadn't seen directed his way in a long, long time. So, Tom said, a twinkle returning to his tired eyes. Are you open on Christmas Eve? For you? Sarah wiped a non-existent crumb from the counter. I might be persuaded. Good, Tom smiled. I'd like to book a table. 4, 2. Just 2. Yeah, Tom nodded, the ghost of the Victorian house finally fading from his mind. Just the people who actually want to be there. Tom has finally drawn the line. He just cut the financial cord to save his dignity. If you are still watching and believe he made the right decision, please comment the number 1 below to let me know you're here with us. And if you haven't already, I highly recommend you subscribe to Dramaine Revenge and turn on the notification bell right now. You do not want to miss the fireworks when the reality check hits North Hill. Your support helps us continue creating great content to inform and inspire you. Now, let's continue and watch the House of Cards fall. March in Silver Creek was an ugly season. The pristine white snow of December had long since turned into a gray, churning slush that splashed onto windshields and ruined expensive shoes. It was a time of thawing, of things buried deep finally surfacing to see the light of day. For Brian Shelby, the thaw arrived on a Tuesday morning in the form of a stiff yellow envelope taped to his front door, bearing the ominous red stamp, Certified Mail. Brian stared at the envelope. His hands, usually steady when signing real estate contracts, trembled as he ripped it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper, the letterhead of the community bank stark and unforgiving. Notice of default. The words seemed to swim before his eyes. Past due balance, $9,600. Principal, interest, and late fees. Immediate payment required to avoid foreclosure proceedings. 9,600. Brian whispered, his stomach dropping to his shoes. That's impossible. He scrambled for his phone, his thumb slipping on the screen as he dialed the priority banking line. He expected to hear Jennifer's cheerful voice telling him it was a clerical error, a computer glitch that could be fixed with a few keystrokes. Accounts receivable, this is Mark, a clipped, professional voice answered. Yes, this is Brian Shelby. I received a notice. There must be a mistake. The mortgage on the North Hill property is on autopay. It comes out of my father's account every month on the 20th. One moment, Mr. Shelby. The sound of typing filled the silence, louder than the pounding of Brian's heart. I see the account here. The automatic transfer authorization was revoked on December 24th by the account holder, Mr. Thomas Shelby. We sent a notification to the address on file in January and another in February. Revoked. Brian leaned against the wall, his legs suddenly feeling like water. But he didn't tell me. The account holder is not required to notify beneficiaries of a cancellation, sir. The mortgage is in your name. The liability is yours. The front door opened, and Emily walked in, shaking a wet umbrella. She stopped when she saw Brian's pale face. Brian? What is it? Who died? The house? Brian croaked. The payments. Dad stopped paying them. In December. What? Emily dropped her umbrella. Her shock instantly morphed into the sharp, defensive anger of someone who had never been told no. He can't do that. He promised. We built our budget around that money. My parents are coming for Easter next week. What are we going to tell them? As if summoned by the mention of his name, a car door slammed outside. Richard and Linda Vance were early for their pre-Easter visit. Richard walked in, spotting the yellow paper in Brian's hand immediately. He was a man who smelled weakness like a shark smells blood. Is that a legal notice? Richard barked, snatching the paper from Brian's limp hand. He scanned it, his face turning a deep, dangerous shade of purple. Foreclosure? You're 3 months behind? Jesus, Brian, I thought you were a competent businessman. It's not his fault. Emily cried, linking her arm through Brian's, though her eyes were furious. It's Tom. He cut us off without warning. He stopped the payments. Richard threw the paper onto the side table. I knew it. That irresponsible, blue-collar pettiness. He probably spent the money on some new truck part or a fishing trip and forgot about his obligations. You can't rely on people like that. He didn't forget, Brian said quietly. He was remembering the look in his father's eyes on Christmas Eve. I understand my position. Well, fix it, Richard commanded, pacing the living room floor in his Italian loafers, careful to step over the melting slush Brian had tracked in. Call him. Demand he make this right. He publicly humiliated us with that truck at Christmas, and now he's trying to ruin us financially? Get him on the phone. Now, Brian pulled out his phone again. He felt sick. He felt small. But the fear of losing the house, the fear of Richard's judgment, was stronger than his shame. He dialed his father's number. It rang 4 times. Hello. Tom's voice was calm. In the background, Brian could hear the peaceful sound of a river running and the whir of a fishing reel. Dad, Brian's voice cracked. We got a letter. From the bank. I imagined you would. Right about now, Tom said. No anger. No apology. Just a fact. Dad, they're going to take the house. It's nearly $10,000. Why didn't you tell me? I told you on Christmas Eve, Brian, Tom replied. I told you I wouldn't stain your picture anymore. This isn't a game, Dad. Richard and Linda are here. Everyone is freaking out. We need to fix this. Richard snatched the phone from Brian's hand. Shelby, this is Richard Vance. Now you listen here. You made a commitment to these children. You don't just walk away because your feelings got hurt. I expect a check on this table by tomorrow morning, or what, Richard? Tom's voice cut through the speaker, hard as steel. You'll sue me for stopping a gift? Put Brian back on. Richard sputtered and shoved the phone back at Brian. Dad, if you want to talk about this, Brian, Tom said, come to the shop. The old garage on 4th Street. And bring your in-laws. All of them. The shop. Brian asked, confused. Why? Because I have something of yours. and I think it's time I returned it to its rightful owners." The line went dead. Brian lowered the phone. He looked at Emily, terrified and angry. He looked at Richard, fuming with entitlement. "We have to go," Brian said. "To where?" "The bank," Emily asked. "No," Brian grabbed his coat. "To the garage." The sleek silver Mercedes sedan looked painfully out of place as it crunched over the gravel and potholes of the dirt road leading to Tom's old mechanic shop. It looked like a spaceship that had crash-landed in a scrapyard. Around it, stacks of old tires, rusted engine blocks, and the skeletal remains of a 1970s Chevy pickup stood as silent sentinels of a working life. Inside the garage, the air was thick with the smells of 40 years of labor, heavy grease, metallic dust, and old coffee. Tom stood by his heavy steel workbench, slowly wiping his hands with a red shop rag. He watched the car park through the grimy window. He wasn't nervous. In fact, he felt a strange sense of calm, the kind a mechanic feels when he finally diagnoses a rattle that's been plaguing an engine for months. He knew exactly what was broken, and he knew it couldn't be fixed with a wrench. The garage door rolled up with a metallic rattle. Richard Vance stepped out first, checking the soles of his Italian loafers with a grimace of disgust. Linda followed, clutching her purse tight to her chest as if the grease in the air might stain it. Emily looked ready to cry, and Brian looked like a man walking to the gallows. "This is it," Richard sneered, looking around the cluttered, dim space. "This is where you summon us? It smells like a refinery in here." "It smells like work, Richard," Tom said calmly, tossing the rag onto the bench. "Something you might not recognize." "Don't get cute with me, Shelby," Richard snapped, his face flushing. He marched up to the workbench, treating it like a witness stand. "You have some nerve, dragging us out here to this dump, after abandoning your financial obligations. Do you have any idea the stress you've caused my daughter? We're talking about foreclosure, for God's sake." "I know what foreclosure is," Tom said. "I also know what a budget is. Seems like you folks forgot to make one." "We had a budget," Emily shouted, her voice shrill. "It included your contribution. You promised." "Contribution?" Tom raised an eyebrow. "Is that what we're calling it now? Last I checked, a contribution is something you give to charity. A mortgage payment is what you pay for a house you own. Stop playing word games." Richard slammed his hand on the workbench, immediately regretting it as he pulled back to inspect his palm for dust. "You agreed to support them. You pulled the rug out from under them out of spite because of some perceived slight at a party. It's petty. It's low class. Exactly what I'd expect from a man who spent his life turning wrenches." Tom didn't yell. He didn't lunge. He simply reached down behind the workbench and pulled out a thick, battered accordion file folder. He lifted it high and let it drop onto the steel table. Thud. The sound was heavy, final, like a judge's gavel. Dust motes danced in the shaft of afternoon sunlight cutting through the window. "You talk a lot about class, Richard," Tom said, undoing the elastic band on the folder. "Let's talk about math instead." He flipped the folder open. Inside were stacks of paper, neatly organized by year. Bank statements, carbon copies of cashier's checks, contractor invoices. This, Tom pulled out the first stack, is the down payment. $50,000. Paid from the sale of my first tow truck fleet. He pulled out the next stack. These are the renovation bills. Granite countertops, hardwood floors, that slate roof you like so much. $18,000. He reached into the thickest section. And these are the monthly mortgage payments. $3,200 a month. For 48 months. Tom looked up, his eyes locking onto Bryant's. $153,600 in mortgage payments alone. Total investment, over $220,000. The silence in the garage was deafening. Even the hum of the old refrigerator seemed to stop. Richard stared at the pile of paper, his mouth slightly open. Linda looked away. "You call me a plumber. You call me a mechanic. You sneer at my truck." Tom's voice remained level, but it carried the weight of iron. "But this low-class mechanic has been funding your high-class lifestyle for 5 years. Every sip of wine you drank in that living room, every log you burned in that fireplace. I paid for it. My dirty hands signed the checks that kept your hands clean." Brian finally spoke, his voice barely a whisper. "Dad, I didn't cut the money because I ran out, Brian," Tom said, cutting him off gently. And I didn't cut it because I hate you. He leaned forward, placing both hands on the workbench. I cut it because on Christmas Eve, you looked me in the eye and told me I wasn't good enough to sit at the table I paid for. You chose their approval over my dignity. You were ashamed of me. Brian looked down at his shoes, tears welling in his eyes. He couldn't deny it. I'd rather eat a sandwich alone in my truck than eat a turkey dinner with people who think I'm beneath them, Tom said. The bank of Dad is closed. Not for repairs. Permanently. You can't do this, Emily sobbed, but the fire was gone from her voice. We'll lose everything. Then you lose it, Tom said simply. And maybe when you have nothing left, you'll figure out who you actually are. He pointed a calloused finger toward the open garage door, where the sunlight was beginning to fade. Now get out of my shop. I have real work to do. Richard opened his mouth to speak, looked at the mountain of receipts, and closed it again. For the first time in his life, he had been outbid. He turned on his heel and marched to the car. Linda followed. Emily grabbed Brian's arm, pulling him away, but Brian lingered for a second, looking back at his father standing amidst the tools and the grease. Tom didn't look back. He picked up his shop rag and turned to the old engine block on the stand, waiting for the sound of the expensive car to fade away so he could finally enjoy the peace of an honest day's work. The wooden real estate sign planted on the manicured lawn of 42 North Hill Drive no longer advertised a dream. It now bore a bright red rider that read, in bold, unapologetic letters, sold. Brian Shelby stood on the sidewalk, looking at the house one last time. It was the first warm day of April, and the slush had finally given way to patches of stubborn green grass. The Victorian mansion looked as majestic as ever, but to Brian, it just looked like a heavy coat he had finally taken off in the heat. He didn't feel the crushing sadness he expected. Instead, as he turned away and walked toward his modest sedan, the Lexus had been repossessed 3 weeks ago. He felt a strange, terrifying lightness. He drove 20 minutes across town to The Pines, a nondescript apartment complex near the industrial park. It wasn't prestigious. The appliances weren't stainless steel, and the countertops were laminate that peeled slightly at the corners. But the rent was checkable against his own salary, and the name on the lease was his alone. Inside his new living room, surrounded by half-unpacked cardboard boxes, sat the only object he had specifically saved from the garage before the sale, the red and green wrapped box his father had brought on Christmas Eve. Brian tore off the paper. The Craftsman wrench set inside gleamed under the harsh apartment lighting. He ran his thumb over the cold steel of a 5/8-inch socket. It felt solid. Real. Time to fix something, he whispered to the empty room. 2 days later, on a bright Saturday morning, the bell above the door at Sarah's diner jingled. The breakfast rush was dying down, the air filled with the comfortable clatter of silverware and the smell of bacon grease. Tom was sitting in his usual booth by the window, a half-finished crossword puzzle in front of him. Across from him sat Sarah, laughing at something he had just said. Her hand was resting casually on his forearm. They both looked up when a shadow fell across the table. Mind if I join you? Tom looked up. Brian stood there. He wasn't wearing the tailored Italian suit he had worn at Christmas. He was wearing a pair of dark jeans and a simple gray polo shirt. He looked tired older, but his eyes were clear. It's a free country, Tom said, gesturing to the empty space on the bench. Pull up a slab. Brian sat down. He didn't fidget. He didn't look at his phone. He placed both hands on the table, hands that were starting to look a little less soft. I sold a house, Brian said. Closed yesterday. I saw the sign. Tom nodded, taking a sip of his black coffee. Did you get enough to cover the bank? Just enough. The equity you put in, it's gone, Dad. I used it to pay off the mortgage arrears and the credit cards Emily maxed out. We're square with the bank. I'm starting at zero. Zero is a good place to start, Tom said. It's better than negative. Emily went back to Connecticut. Brian continued, his voice wavering slightly. She said she couldn't live in a 2-bedroom apartment. Said it wasn't the life she signed up for. I'm sorry to hear that, son, Tom said, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely surprised. I'm not, Brian said, and the honesty of it seemed to surprise even him. I realized something when I was packing up that big, empty house. I spent 5 years trying to be the man Richard Vance wanted me to be. I forgot how to be the man Thomas Shelby raised. He looked at Sarah, then back at his father. I traded you for a slate roof and a country club membership. And I lost both. I'm sorry, Dad. Not because I need money. I don't want a dime. I just... I wanted you to know that I kept the wrenches. Sarah smiled, a genuine warmth spreading across her face. She squeezed Tom's arm. Tom looked at his son. He saw the humility in his posture, the lack of pretension. He saw a man who had finally hit bottom and found solid ground. It takes a strong man to build a house, Brian, Tom said softly. But it takes a stronger one to tear it down and start over when the foundation is rotten. I'm proud of you. The waitress came by with a pot of coffee. Top you off, hon? Please, Brian said. And I'll take a slice of cherry pie. I hear it's the best in the state. You heard right, Tom grinned. This is Sarah. She's the architect of that pie. And she's the reason I didn't drive my truck off a cliff on Christmas Eve. Nice to meet you, Sarah. Brian extended his hand. And thank you. Nice to meet you, Brian. Sarah shook it firmly. Your dad talks about you. The good stuff mostly. They sat for an hour, talking not about real estate or interest rates, but about fishing, about the weather, about the way the light hit the mountains in the spring. It was the first real conversation they had shared in a decade. When the check came, Tom reached for his wallet out of habit. No, Brian said, his hand shooting out to cover the bill. I got this. It's just coffee and pie, Brian. I can handle it, Tom said. I know you can, Brian said, pulling out a debit card, his own card, linked to his own salary. But I want to. I can afford a cup of coffee, Dad. And I'd like to treat you for once. Tom hesitated, then slowly pulled his hand back. He looked at the card, then up at his son's determined face. He smiled, a smile of genuine respect. All right, then. Thanks for the coffee. They walked out of the diner together into the crisp spring air. The sun was shining on the dirty snowbanks, melting them away to reveal the earth beneath. What are you two up to today? Brian asked. Going fishing, Tom said, jerking a thumb toward the F-150. 2 fishing rods were visible in the bed, sticking up like antennae. Sarah claims she can outfish me. I intend to prove her wrong. In your dreams, Shelby, Sarah laughed, climbing into the passenger seat. Tom opened the driver's door. The old hinges didn't squeak anymore. He had oiled them weeks ago. He looked back at Brian. You free next weekend? Tom asked. I might need help with the boat engine. It's got a rattle. I'm free, Brian smiled. I'll bring my wrenches. You do that. Tom climbed in and turned the key. The engine roared to life, loud and proud. As he pulled out of the parking lot, with Sarah laughing beside him and his son waving from the sidewalk, Tom Shelby realized he was the richest man in Silver Creek. He didn't have a slate roof or a granite countertop, but he had his dignity, he had love, and for the first time in a long time, he had his family back. The Ford F-150 turned onto the main road, leaving a small cloud of white exhaust that quickly vanished into the blue spring sky. As Tom's truck disappeared down that spring road, he proved that the richest legacy we leave behind isn't built with granite or slate, but with self-respect and the courage to demand it. True family isn't defined by blood or social standing, but by the people who welcome you to their table exactly as you are, grease stains, old trucks, and all. Sometimes the most loving thing a parent can do is close their checkbook, so their children can finally find their own strength. If Tom's quiet victory warmed your heart today, please leave a like and share your own story of dignity in the comments. We read every single one. And for more powerful stories where justice is always served cold, make sure to subscribe and join our family here at Dramaine Revenge.